Eugenics is not a new idea, and it didn't start with the Nazis, but with American and British socialists and progressives, who thought that through measures like prohibition and later birth control, they could cure the ills of modern society, such as poor public hygiene, rising population among lower classes, and urban crowding. Indiana passed the first sterilization law in 1907 for confirmed criminals, idiots, imbeciles, and rapists. And in the next 30 years, 29 other states followed suit, along with Canada and most of Europe. Eugenics infected the mindset of intellectuals such as the leader of the new liberalism movement of the early 20th century, Herbert Croly. He wrote a book in 1909 called The Promise of American Life, in which he declared that the state must, quote, interfere on behalf of the really fittest. Eugenics was also popular thought for Presidents Woodrow Wilson, Teddy Roosevelt, and their advisors. In 1912, a year before he was president, New Jersey's Governor Woodrow Wilson created a board of examiners of feeble-minded epileptics and other defectives. Under it, the state could determine, quote, when procreation is inadvisable, like for criminals, prisoners, poor kids, and the ill-defined, other defectives, end quote. Roosevelt's close advisor, Charles Van Hise, said, quote, he who thinks of himself not primarily, but of his race and of its future, is the new patriot, end quote. Former President Roosevelt later endorsed Madison Grant's Passing of the Great Race, a book that Hitler once referred to as his Bible. What most history textbooks seem to ignore is that before the Nazis took power, Germans lagged behind Americans and Europeans in eugenics. But World War I and the Great Flu pandemic basically turned doctors into social planners, and Hitler and the Nazis took the logic of public health to totalitarian extremes. They made the central policy goal affecting employment, marriage, medicine, and more. The same year Hitler joined the Nazi Party in 1920, the Nazis rounded up hundreds of thousands of disabled, elderly, and mentally ill, and exterminated them as, quote, useless bread gobblers, or life unworthy of life, end quote. Back to America. Eugenics was being effectively written into the Constitution. In the Buck versus Bell case in 1927, progressive lawyers stood on the flimsy ground of a Massachusetts vaccination law to keep Carrie Buck from reproducing. We know now she wasn't retarded. But to add insult to injury, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes infamously wrote, quote, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough, end quote. 7 years later, Hitler wrote to the president of the American Eugenics Society to ask for a copy of his famous Case for Sterilization, which called for forced sterilization of some 10 million Americans. During that year, the Nazis sterilized over 50,000 unfit Germans, which caused an American eugenicist to complain, quote, the Germans are beating us at our own game. The Nazi eugenic idea evolved naturally into the eventual Holocaust and the deaths of 6 million Jews, as well as millions of other innocent people.